Hi everyone. So I'm making this video to talk about the open letter that was released on the 24th of March 2013, in which a group of former judges released a joint statement opposing the idea of the Supreme Court legalizing same sex marriage. Now, it's not uncommon in India for people to write joint statements opposing or supporting either government policies or impending judgments or even judgments that have come out. So, for example, during the CAA protests in India, there were a couple of actors and activists, human rights defenders who opposed the CAA, and similarly, you had politicians, bureaucrats who supported the CAA. You had lawyers on both sides as well talking about the issue. So this is not uncommon territory. In this video, I'm not going to be rebutting the statement released by the former judges, even though the statement is outrageous and is filled with misinformation, lies, and wrong information. But what I want to talk about is more about this question of who has the moral authority to actually talk about marginalized people. Who are these people who think that they can speak for a community that has experienced discrimination for so many years and are seeking a basic and fundamental right, which is the right to marry, a right that heterosexual people have never had to fight for, except in certain cases such as intercaste marriages and interreligious marriages, and in the case of live in relationships between opposite couples. Who are these people who have this moral high ground and are saying things, and I'm quoting the end, that the Supreme Court should refrain from doing so in the best interest of Indian society and culture? So these people are purportedly the guardians of moral of Indian society and culture. So I want to put the focus on Justice S.N. Dhingra, who signed this letter, because he's the only person who's named in this letter. And I did a little bit of research to understand who is this gentleman who talks so much about culture, ethics, and values. He must be somebody who has a very strong moral compass and who purportedly has a clean slate. Because when people talk about social justice and issues of social justice, it is great when people who have a history in human rights defending, who have a history in supporting human rights. It's really great when those kind of people come forward and make their views public when it comes to issues of marginalization and social justice. And he is a retired High Court judge. He's a retired High Court justice. So I'm sure that he has not just a lot of knowledge, but also has a stellar human rights record. But that's actually not true. So I did a little bit of digging, and I want to bring everyone's attention to this. So I'm referring to an article in the print, and I'm just opening that article, which was published on 22nd November 2017. I've linked it in the description below, which actually highlights how Justice S.N. Dhingra was embroiled in a controversy in which he misused his power as a court-appointed observer of a private company that was allegedly dealing in in some sort of shady activity with another company that was owned by his daughter. So I am not really sure about what the final outcome of the case was and whether he was actually proven guilty or not. But I think it's extremely significant that this case moved all its way to the Delhi High Court. And it's extremely important to also notice that a man like him should not be taken seriously when he talks about values, especially family values, because what we see in this case is an example of corruption, alleged corruption. I want to be very clear with my words. So, a little bit of background: Justice S.N. Dhingra, he probed Robert Vadra's controversial land deals in Gurgaon, and he is also somebody who awarded the death sentence to Afzal Guru. So, he is a man who has really taken on serious people and has played an important role in our judicial history. But he himself came under a lot of criticism. So, what exactly happened? So it all had to do with this company and him being a court observer to this company. So um, let's kind of get into the bottom of this. So there's this company called the Printers House Limited, and in 2016, Justice Dhingra took over as a court-appointed observer for this company, which manufactures printing materials, after a previous judge had retired. So why was he appointed as a court observer? To basically ensure that a settlement could be achieved in a murky family dispute. So this is an issue that this family dispute had been going on since 2016, and it happened when the owner of the company, the Printers House Limited, slipped into a coma. So what happened was Justice Dhingra took over as the court-appointed observer, and the court-appointed observer is meant to be neutral. But then there was a senior employee whose name is Jagdeep Singh, who was a vice president, alleged that he was wrongfully removed within a month of his promotion as a vice president because he raised concerns about alleged impropriety and conflict of interest. So let's figure out what was this issue. Why was this man, this alleged vice president, this, sorry, not alleged, why was this man, a vice president, fired from his job because he simply raised concerns of alleged impropriety? And let's kind of go into that. So let me go into the article. Um, okay. So basically, what happened was this: there was another company called Cinnamon Trails. This is a company in which Justice Dhingra's daughter is a partner, and a lot of money was being transferred from the first company, the company that Justice Dhingra was a court-appointed observer for, the what's its name, the Printers House Limited. So this person, Mr. Singh, who was a vice president, noticed that a lot of money was being sent to this other company, and he basically raised this red flag. And it was because he raised this red flag that he was kicked out. He was fired. Um, and so the Delhi High Court released an order which froze all these decisions by Justice Dhingra over Mr. Singh's termination, because it did feel that there was something shady in Justice Dhingra's actions. So now let's look at the other company, Cinnamon Trails. What is it? What was shady about this company? So this was a company that was just registered a few months before Mr. Justice Dhingra took over as a court-appointed observer of the printers company, and it has only two listed partners. One is his daughter, and the other person is another man. And how much money was being made, sent, transferred from the printers company to Cinnamon Trails? Um, it says almost 8.8, almost 8 lakhs. Um, Sorry, almost 6 lakhs. So this man was actually given, so this man, Mr. Singh, was actually given a promotion. And then after given a promotion, he was fired. Why? Because he raised a red flag. And he basically said in his, when he was speaking to the court, that I merely very politely inquired from you if such payments would be inappropriate considering you're a court observer. So all he was saying was that you're a court observer, and these payments are being made from from this company that you're a court observer of, to a company that is in which your daughter has a very significant role, and it's a lot of money. Is this a red flag or not? Similarly, he raised complaints over travel and a five-star hotel stay request by Justice Dhingra on behalf of his family. So, of course, Justice Dhingra said there was no wrongdoing. He said that he traveled because of some work related stuff. And he also said that he took up this job in the insistence of a former judge. But I find, again, all of that a little vague, because if you never really wanted a job, you could have said you didn't. You could have said that you didn't want that job. Um, and it is also very clear and very shady that a company is set up just a few months before you become a court appointed observer, and then all of this money is being transferred to that company in which your daughter is very conveniently a partner. But anyway, all of these allegations made their way to court, and the former judge, it says in the report, he chose to resign instead of refuting the allegations. So I am assuming that the matter ended there. So this is one instance. And then for the second one, I'm actually quoting Op India, because I think that people want to hear from different viewpoints. So let me quote Op India, which is a more right-leaning platform as opposed to the Quint. And it talks about how Justice Dhingra was almost criminally charged for contempt of court. So here is a man who, it seems, has very little regard for the Supreme Court's oral arguments in one particular case itself. So this was regarding Nupur Sharma. So for some of you who don't know, Nupur Sharma is a political commentator. She's very active in news debates, and she said some very derogatory comments about Prophet Muhammad. She received a lot of backlash for it. I believe she was removed from her role as a spokesperson of the BJP, And eventually there was a clash in Udaipur in which one individual called Kanhaiya Lal was beheaded. And the case before the Supreme Court was that Nupur Sharma's comments were so inflammatory that it led to his beheading. And the Supreme Court really lambasted Nupur Sharma and said that just because you're a member of the ruling party, you carelessly went on to make those comments. Um, so this was kind of the line of reasoning that the Supreme Court made, and it was very, very upset and angry at Nupur Sharma for what she said about Prophet Muhammad, and how it really caused this kind of hatred and kind of this kind of clash in Udaipur. So what did just retired Justice Dhingra say? Justice Dhingra said the Supreme Court has said that Nupur Sharma was high on power, but as per my conscience, the same thing also applies to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court cannot hold anyone guilty without investigation, which is true, but this matter was investigated. And then he went on to say that how can the Supreme Court make such oral arguments? If the Supreme Court had guts, it would have put those arguments in a written order. Um, so the court can decide whether it wants to put what it wants to put in the written order or not, but it has the freedom and the ability to make oral arguments and oral statements, because that is what the judges feel when they hear somebody plead their case. Um, and then he kind of went on to say this gives a bad message in the country that the Supreme Court is high on power and no one can stop the Supreme Court from saying anything at its will. Who said that the Supreme Court can say anything at its will? The Supreme Court looked at the matter in the case and it said what it felt was appropriate. And there's nothing, and I don't understand why that's a problem, especially when we're talking about free speech, because this is essentially an issue of what are the restrictions of free speech, what should be considered appropriate speech, what should be not considered appropriate speech. How can the Supreme Court make such comments without even observing and knowing any facts? I'm sure there were facts before the Supreme Court. That's how the case made its way to the court. So this man was clearly upset and angry at the court for making these statements. Uh, it There was a case, a criminal. So there is something known as contempt of court, and a case against him and two other people was made for contempt of court, but it was eventually dismissed by the Attorney General of India, then Attorney General of India. And I think that's great because I'm a firm believer of free speech. So I'm glad that the contempt of court was not really filed. But here is a man who, and I'm just kind of summarizing it, who was alleged in some shady business dealings when he was a court appointed judge. In other words, allegedly misusing his own power as a court appointed observer. And then in the Nupur Sharma case, making inflammatory comments about the Supreme Court, saying things that saying things like this, who gives the Supreme Court so much power to do things like this? Let me just see if I can get his exact quote. I think he used the word guts. Yeah, he said that if the Supreme Court had guts, it would have put their oral arguments in a written order. I mean, that is really a really sad thing to say about the Supreme Court, even though I don't consider it contempt. So going back to the original case, the question about same-sex marriage, if this was somebody who had a stellar human rights background, who has real issues about same-sex marriage or same-sex people, I would have taken him seriously. But he's somebody who has a very shady background, a very checkered background. Somebody who almost had a criminal case filed against him and was, you know, saved in the last minute by the Attorney General, right? Who are such people to make comments about moral rights, about morality, and about things of that nature? And going back to the first case about alleged shady dealings between him and his daughter's company, you talk about family values, right? Is this an example of family values? No, it's not. I do want to emphasize that this was alleged, but this is coming from somebody who does not have a clean slate. So when somebody does not have a clean slate, you do not take their comments seriously. These are people who just probably want to get political mileage, who just want to get attention, and I hope they don't. I hope that the Supreme Court does not consider what he says to be to have weight, given his own background and his own history of disrespecting the Supreme Court. And I think that's extremely important. I'll just conclude by saying this: that if you disrespect the Supreme Court in a case because you feel that it's too political, then I think that you should excuse yourself from issues that are already politicized. And if you come from a situation or a background where you have been allegedly involved in some sort of malpractice, then I think you should stay away from giving other people gyan or advice about what is ethical and what isn't. That's all I have to say about this.